Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and you're watching The Brown Feminist. And today's video is a specially requested one by many of my viewers, and we will be talking about scientific journals, writing, publishing, figuring things out, understanding its importance in the world of clinical research. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first question we're going to understand and answer today is, what exactly is a peer-reviewed journal article? Now, you must have heard of the term articles, which is like, a little piece, kind of like an essay published in different places, magazines, newspapers, and so on. Even if you write about like health or scientific information, that doesn't necessarily make it a journal article written for a particular peer-reviewed journal. So what exactly makes it peer-reviewed and high quality and authentic and trustworthy by the rest of the scientific community? So essentially, the peer review process is when you submit your article with all the information about why, what hypothesis you were testing, how you went about doing the experiment, how exactly the methods turned out, what the data was, how you analyzed and interpreted it, and, what the outcome was. Is it really, proving or disproving the hypothesis? And all of that stuff, which shows if it was a rigorous method and truly was that evidence to support or dissupport what you were trying to understand about, your subject matter. And all of this information is submitted to a respectable journal, and through that journal platform, they reach out to your peers, which means other scientists in the field, other doctors in the field, other experts like analysts and statisticians in the field. And they figure out through consensus if this journal is really done a good job and is worthy of publication. What you've shown, did you do it properly? Are there big gaps in the logic? Are there big mistakes in like calculations or not? So your peers in the community are going to check your work and then decide if it's worthy of publication. And that's what makes it a peer-reviewed journal article. And if you haven't gone through a peer review process, there is no saying what you've written, right? So one person who's publishing, you obviously have a vested interest in getting it published because, you've spent your time and money and energy and you want the reputation. So just you saying this is good work and I have like this degree is not sufficient to get a publication. Others in your field from across the world also need to agree that, what you've done was done in the right way and it is acceptable and it is worthy of publication and it could actually prove or disprove what you were trying to do. And so when you submit to peer-reviewed articles, there are different kind of journals of different qualities and impact factors. We'll get more into that in the later part of this video. But it's important to understand that there is a lot of prestige and there is a lot of importance of submitting to peer-reviewed, platforms. So by submitting and getting published in a peer-reviewed journal article, you get to actually add to the body of knowledge that's out there. And this goes for any fields, but as we go forward, we will be focusing more and more on the clinical research field and how this is relevant there. The second thing is, who exactly can write these articles, right? Who gets to write for these journals? Can it be just anybody? Can anyone just like walk off the street, maybe with some or no education in the field and just decide to write it? So the truth is, anyone can write it, anyone can submit it, but you have a much higher chance of rejection if you don't have like a good, educational background, you don't have qualifications and designations supporting you, you are not affiliated with reputed organizations. So usually in the typical sense, the people who are publishing these, at least one of the major authors has to be a principal investigator of a research study or a physician who's conducted some kind of research in the world of, clinical research, biomedical sciences, and they, along with other people in the team, can write this. When we say other people, the PI can basically write it with a co-PI. They can write it with sub-investigators. They can write it with research coordinators, with research associates, with a lot of people in the team. Research assistants can even be named as authors. So there's a big team, but essentially at least one of the main authors needs to be somebody on whose reputation you can really stand up and submit the work. It can be a professor, it can be a study principal investigator, it can be a physician or sorts. Right? So these are some important things to keep in mind. When I was in undergrad, I was like, oh, I'll just write a really nice review paper and submit it. But it's highly likely to get rejected because they know that even before it enters a peer review process, which takes up people's time and money, and even before it enters it, they want to have some sense of like, this has already gone through an internal review by the team who've written it. So if you are like right out of undergrad or like you just have a fresh grad, you don't have a lot of research experience and you just independently want to write a paper from home, it's highly likely to get rejected. And this is primarily because the journal would know that even before it's entered the peer review process, which is in itself an expensive, time-consuming process for a lot of important people who are taking their time out to edit it, but even before it goes there, it is not sure if it's gone through a rigorous enough internal review by the writers, right? So you, along with a team of other people and an institution behind you, their name adds that kind of value to make sure it's worth the journal's time to review it. Because when you initially do a submission, they do not charge you money for it. So they're doing the review portion for free. So they need to know it's worth their time and efforts to even go through that review process based on, your institutional affiliations, your designations, qualifications, your co-authors and stuff like that. So usually, it's much better of an idea to wait until you're affiliated with somebody and then ask your PI if you can be part of the manuscript writing process and submission process to get published in a, peer-reviewed journal article. So next we're going to be talking about exactly who gets to publish it and what are impact factors and predatory journals. So essentially, the people who get to publish it are usually like licensed publishing houses who have like a reputation in the field to be doing like clinical research. Their editorial board will have prominent figures who've like been in and around the scientific industry, in and around clinical research and health sciences and biomedicine for many years. And they're basically, they've now joined the editorial board. They've taken responsibility of leading the journal to like a good spot, ensuring the integrity of it, ensuring like a good peer review process internally, a fair publishing process, good editing team, publications and distribution of that publication, and eventually ensuring that that publication becomes available all over the world through these large databases, for example, like PubMed and so on, right? So in order to become something like that and to build that reputation, these people apply, these journals basically apply for something called an impact factor rating. So this term is going to be very important for you to actually understand, like two people who've both published, but one has published in a low impact journal and the other has published in a high impact journal. The high impact journal person has much more likelihood of, getting more reputation out of it, getting cited more for their writing, actually bringing a lot more stronger, more important new knowledge to the field, getting hired with a high impact journal and all of that stuff, getting a teaching position and so much more. The more high impact journals you have, the more successful you are considered. But that doesn't mean that low impact journals are not worth getting published in. Usually when you start off and you're studying a little thing, which might not be able to change the whole like knowledge base of your industry, but it's still like new research. It's still new knowledge, right? So for example, like my master's publication was like a low to medium publication. And it was my first publication. I was just in grad school. I was the first author. For me, any publication in a proper peer-reviewed journal with an impact factor was a big step up. But later on in my career, I'm always seeking the opportunities to actually publish somewhere with like a 10, 50, 20, 30 kind of impact factor and so on. Whereas the first one I published was around 6 or 7. And there's even journals with impact factors from 0.99. So essentially, impact factors can range from like 0 to like 100 or more. But anything from 0 to 5 is considered slightly low impact, and then 5 to like 10 or 15 is considered medium impact, and 15 onwards is considered high impact in the field as we are. 30 is considered really high. 30, 40, 50 is where a lot of these high impact journals stand. So the other thing you also want to be careful about are predatory journals. Now, predatory journals are essentially journals who just want to make money out of publishing your work. They're going to make it sound like they're a full-on like scientific peer-reviewed process. They're going to make you feel all of that. in their writing. However, all they want to do is make the money, and they don't have a good peer review process. And a way to find out if a journal is indeed predatory is, first of all, search for their impact factor. Most of them do not even have an impact factor. Just having a journal that's titled like, Journal of like Hepatology, Biomolecular Sciences, or whatever, like just having a scientific name and having a license in some country is not sufficient. You want to make sure they have an impact factor rating. And once they do, you'll also notice a difference in solicitation. A lot of the predatory journals are always out there reaching out to you, filling up your inbox, saying, hey, I want to publish your work. It's so great. But usually, like prominent journals will not do that. You will have to reach out to them and go through a strict intake process. So if it seems too easy, too good to be true, it probably is. So be careful of predatory journals, and we'll talk more about it in another video. To finish off our discussion around impact factors, like I was saying, anything that's novel or new to the field and you're adding knowledge that can automatically, have some impact factor, right? So how practice changing and groundbreaking that research is in your field is going to determine how high of an impact factor they get and you can get published in. And also for the journal, how rigorous their process of accepting a paper is going to determine how high an impact factor they get in their next year's ratings. So for me, for example, when I showed in a particular disease, when one small molecule was making one certain little change in the body, that one molecule might not be able to fully cure the disease or change the course of the disease, but it is adding to the body of knowledge. Previously, we didn't know that one molecule used to interact in that way with that one immune cell in this disease model. So it's still novel enough, but it might not be novel enough to get published in Nature or something super high like Cells or Science like that. However, if the person who first discovered this is the structure of a hepatitis C virus, or this is the cure for hepatitis C virus, those are like groundbreaking, practice changing research, and they do a lot of rigorous background work to prove it in multiple different ways to make sure it's not a false positive, it's a true result and all of that, and their sensitivity analysis and stuff like that. So they get published in higher impact journals because they are indeed doing practice changing, groundbreaking research. Does every journal, does every article you ever work on have to be groundbreaking? No, absolutely not. Even small bodies of novel knowledge do add up in the long term. And you don't know, 5 years later, 10 years later, what you publish in a small scale in a low impact journal might add to that body of knowledge needed to see the full picture of a disease and then go on to the next phase. And at that time, whoever's working on that project may be citing your work as one of the preliminary work. Now let's talk about how exactly we begin writing, the writing process of a journal article. Now this process varies significantly between basic sciences and clinical research. In basic sciences, where you're working in a wet lab environment, you first do not start writing the paper, you don't start your data analysis, you are generating the data raw by running your experiments. So a significant portion of time, like 6 months or a year, will go into just, deciding your hypothesis, designing your experiment, optimizing everything, making sure the experiment is running properly and your controls are working, and then look at the data, visualize it, presenting it to your internal team, seeing if there's any findings worthy of publication or not. And then finally, once all of that is done, you go boom, 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 you publish your paper. You already have all the data and all the methods that you've used, you have your full protocol ready to go. Clinical research is significantly different because while in many of the studies you are like running a trial, for example, but parts of it you can actually start plotting from early on because it's more likely that both positive and negative data, or proving or disproving something, both of them will get published. Which means if you're working in a lab and you try to prove something, but all your experiments can fail, right? You might have no data, or you might have non-publishable data or negative data. Sadly and unfortunately, and I don't agree with this practice, but this kind of data is less likely to ever get published, or it might get published as part of a larger article with a different focus. Whereas in clinical research, when you're working with human subjects, especially like a niche population with a specific disease, and you're testing out a drug, whether or not it works, it's more likely to be publishable. So your publishing process and writing process can start up much earlier on. And a lot of the times what I've seen in clinical trials, especially investigator-led ones, is there can be an initial publication which just publishes the protocol. And you justify why you have designed the protocol, why you've chosen this patient population to work with, why you've actually selected this drug to test, or a combination of drugs that are in the market, or a different surgical way, or a different method of doing a certain assessment protocol or a diagnostic protocol. And then what parameters you're following, what are the outcomes, what are the potential side effects, what is the way you're ensuring data integrity, like a data safety monitoring board or patient safety outcomes. And all of that itself can be a protocol article. Now this is very rare in basic sciences, but in clinical research, because it's happening in a human body, there's no risk of it not being translatable to bedside. Whereas in basic science, we see like, oh, this happened, but what are the chances it's going to matter in clinical, in human physiology? Whereas in clinical research, you're already going to be testing it on live human beings, which is our ultimate kind of, vivo bodies, model organism where we want to test our products, because most of the drugs are being designed for humans. So you can go ahead and publish your protocol for a major study. You can go ahead and even do interim analysis. This is something I've done recently where we had a long study running for 5 years, and we had like half of the number of patients we wanted recruited within like 6 months to a year or 2 years. And we were like, okay, we're going to see so far what are the outcomes. Are people adhering to this new drug type? Are people actually more likely or less likely to continue on in the study? And like, what are the side effects we're starting to see? So you can even publish interim analysis without finishing your full study. And then of course, when you finish your full study, you can publish that again. This doesn't mean every single study has to have 3 papers coming out of it. It really depends on like the strength of the study, how unique it is, and like how big it is, how well funded, how many patients there are. If you have 5 patients, like you usually don't publish something after 2 patients. Unless, of course, there's like a very super rare disease where there's only 5 reported cases in the whole country. In that case, you might even be able to publish something called a case report, which is like, a physician team's own observation about how that rare disease patient came to be and how they were managed, what the outcomes was, what the other experiences was, and all of that patient experience, physician experience, health outcomes, diagnostic results, and so on. So I personally feel that clinical research can be a lot more publishable, and whatever you are publishing can be a lot more translatable to clinical practice. Now let's talk about how much this process costs in order to publish a journal article. So typically it could cost anywhere between like $500 to like $3,000, $5,000. There's really no minimum or maximum, but it usually does cost something in order to publish. Sometimes when a journal is just launching, they might have like a special rate. They might have special relationships with your institution. Suppose you're a professor or you're a research associate teaching or working through a research institute or like a university. That university might have a special relationship with the publication house in order to have a special discounted rate, but you personally don't pay for it. It comes out of the research grant budget or the institute. So let's talk about how long it takes to really write and publish a research article in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. The time can obviously vary a lot, but the writing process itself can take months, if not more than that, if not a year. Usually it starts off by somebody in the team who's a little bit more junior, like a research assistant, research coordinator, or an associate, or like a grad student, to put together the first draft with all of the protocols and everything else. Then the PI with their team itself actually will go through multiple rounds of editing. Once all of the editing is done, the PI will then share it with any other co-PIs and affiliates in the institution, maybe other people they have collaborated with for that journal, and they will give further feedback. After that, multiple rounds of drafts. For me, articles have been between 5 and even 20 rounds of drafts and edits over a period of like 5-6 months. Once that is all done, then you want to make an initial decision of which journal you want to apply to, and then you have to format your writing and format everything and meet the word counts and meet the structural requirements of that particular journal. Even once you submit to it, it can take about 4 to 8 weeks or longer for you to hear back from them if it's entered a peer review process. Once you have initial comments from your viewers, it depends on what the comments are. Sometimes you can just get rejected, which means we can then go ahead and resubmit to a different, usually a lower ranking impact factor journal next, and reformat it and continue that cycle. If it does get accepted, there's usually corrections. Almost no journal article gets accepted like as is, but there's at least some corrections from the different reviewers. So you have about a period of 1 month to then work on that and send it back. There can be 1 or 2 more rounds of back and forth with reviewers, and then it enters the editorial process for publishing. Once it's out of hands of reviewers, the editorial team of the journal will then do like more cosmetic changes, make sure the images have the right pixels and sizes and fonts and all of that stuff. And they will, prepare it for the next upcoming publication of the journal, which is typically quarterly in the field. And then finally, you will get a preprint version, you will get a final version to proofread, you will get the published version online, and you might even get the published version in print. The entire process of sitting down to starting to write that first draft to actually getting a physical published copy can be about 1 to 2 years at least. And that's exactly how long it takes to publish your journal article. Let's talk about what exactly it is that we do publish. What is the main content and the chunk of this article that you've written? So for the most part, you know that we have to write data, but of course, every journal article has a full structure. You have to write a little background, which talks about the findings of the fields until you came in and tried to add new knowledge to it. You want to justify why it's worth doing the study. Not every study deserves to be done. Just because I want to see like the difference between this, like dying less painfully or dying more painfully, that's not worth research. So after that, you need to justify why exactly that research needs to be done. Is it going to improve quality of life, reduce pain, improve pain control and reduce pain experience, improve patient experience, reduce quality of care, or find new cures or better cures with better health outcomes, or reduce the burden on the healthcare system, or reduce the cost so more people have access to care. So there's abundant reasons why something might need to be done, but you have to really justify that in the background and show that's why you're testing this particular hypothesis, or you're trying to compare two different drug regimens and so on. So why you're trying to generate this new knowledge in this way. Then, of course, you have to mention your methods in very much, in detail, and your population, why you chose a certain sample size. Finally, we're going to publish our data and results. So your results have to, be very objective, very, showing what you found, and then showing why you think it's significant. You have to do your statistical analysis to back up the data. And finally, in the discussion, you have to talk about, your understanding. We will have a whole other video about how exactly to structure and write these journal articles, how to do your citations and all of that stuff. But that will be in another video, because in this video, we really want to do an overview of the entire writing process. Now, once you have all of this stuff done, focus on highlighting your positive results. So both in the abstract and in the discussion and throughout, you want to show the things that have kind of stood out, right? So you might have tested for 10 different things and you found one very strong thing that happened. You found this one combination of 2 medications which brought the best outcome. So you want to focus on that. Or you're focusing on 3 different disease subtypes and you saw that one group did the worst. They had the worst health outcome. And so you are trying to say that that particular subgroup of people with that disease subtype needs to be the most under surveillance, receive the most early treatment, whatever it is that you're trying to advocate for and interpret. So you want to take out that thing from the results and build on that and show the importance of that. Not every element of your paper will, be of equal importance. There are some things that will stand out more than the others. And that's something you want to pitch. That's something you want to build on. And then of course you want to show the highlights of what you plan to do next or what the field needs next. This is what you've shown in your paper, but what really nearly needs to happen to build on this in the future is maybe better access for people who have a worse prognosis of their disease, right? Or better treatment regimens using the 2 medication combinations needs to be adopted across different age groups and different patient population and repeated on a larger sample size to see that it really works. Now let's talk about authorship and publications. So when you are publishing, there's usually multiple authors, especially when you're doing original research. So there's, of course, review papers, which have fewer authors, because the point of a review, especially a scoping review, is just to kind of summarize in a literature review what's been done in that field with a specific focus, right? So updating all the past original papers and putting it in a story-like format and nicely putting it together into a clear summary picture of what's happened in that field for that topic. But when you're doing original journal articles, you're really like doing a lot of rigorous work, and you have a big enough team, and you want to give all of them credit. Now, what it happens is the PI is obviously the one to decide who gets to be the author on the paper, and it really is up to their discretion. But there are some typical rules that are set out by the scientific community as well as by each journal as well. Even institutions have their own guidelines. So typically, if you have contributed to it through writing, through concept and design, through analysis, through data collection, there's all of these categories where, this one gets to be an author, that one gets to be an author. And then once you get to know who are the people who are going to be authors and who are the people who've brought in the grants and who've got in the original project plans, they're the PIs and collaborators and co-PIs. And then you have the teams who worked on it, on the data collection, data cleaning, data analysis, data visualization, manuscript writing, interpretation, coordination. All those people can also be named on it. So once you know, okay, these are the 10 authors that are going to be named as authors on this particular paper, then you want to know like the sequence of authorship. So typically the first author is like the one who's had the most prominent contribution to that paper, and then the second one, and then the third one, and then it goes downwards. And then the last author is usually the person who like the supervise the most, and then it goes backwards from there. So the last author is often like a senior person who's like, like a supervisor, a division chair or something like that, a PI who's like in charge of the project, but they don't necessarily need to be the first author and get that hands-on credit. So a lot of the time it'll be somebody very senior in the team, in the division. And then going backwards is like a co-PI and such and such. So sometimes you have joint first authors, 2 people or 3 people can share first authorship when they have had equal contribution to the project. And so once you have the people who've contributed the most intellectually, you can go down to then crediting people who've done small pieces, like you had a pathologist or you had a nurse researcher who was like slightly involved in the patient aspect of things. You had somebody else who did all the data analysis, like a statistician. You want to name them 4th and 5th, and therefore going down from there. Let's talk about the most important aspect of this video that I think you guys want to know, which is what is the point or what is the benefit of being published in clinical research in this field, right? Unlike basic sciences, getting published in clinical research is not important to every single member of the team. You could have a career where without any publications, and you can do perfectly well if you go to like coordination side of things, project management side of things, work in industry, work in pharma, and then work for a CRO, become an associate, become a director. You can do all of that without having published. So then what is the benefit of publication? So in clinical research, primarily publication is the most beneficial to people who want to become scientists themselves. They want to become physician investigators, or they want to become research associates. They want to be involved in the scientific aspect more than the project management and coordinator aspect. So if you see yourself eventually becoming a professor someday, or eventually becoming a PI someday, or eventually, gaining a lot of writing experience and becoming a medical writer someday. For all of those things, yes, it does help to have these articles. So you will often see a lot of PIs, their residents, fellows, research assistants, and some coordinators being involved in the writing process. Not every coordinator has an interest. Some coordinators want to work more on pharma trials where publications are just not a thing, but it is more of a thing in investigator-initiated studies. And I'll explain to you why that is. So in an investigator-initiated study, a big purpose of this is to add to the body of knowledge that exists to the scientific community, to the country, to the public. Whereas when you're doing pharma-sponsored studies, their goal as a pharmaceutical company is not necessarily to add to the general body of knowledge that's available to all the population. Rather, their goal is to create enough knowledge and show enough rigorous process to pass through the requirements of the regulatory bodies like FDA and Health Canada and other regulatory bodies in other countries in order to bring their drug that they have discovered and developed to the market to be able to serve it to the people and sell it and turn a profit. So their goal is to actually use their data that they find to submit it for review by like all these regulatory authorities and stuff. But they don't necessarily want to publish it and make every step known because it is their intellectual property and they treat it more as a commodity. These are both fine careers to build into, but there's a lot more weight in like doing a publication in clinical research and having, you know, book chapters and having journal publications and presentations and scholarships. If you're going a little bit more to the academic route, especially for investigator-initiated studies, whose job is to basically write these papers and then use that to get more grants and to build on their personal research interests. For pharma companies, that's definitely not a thing. Having said that, at the site level as well, you can be involved in a coordinator role and project management role and program management role without necessarily doing a lot of writing. But if you do, that's always something that's an additional bonus that PIs really appreciate having. Now, for the last part of this video, I just want to tell you guys a little bit about citation ranking. So suppose you are somebody who has been publishing in the field of clinical research for quite some time, and you want to like know kind of how you rank up against like another candidate or another individual who's also been publishing for a while. There are lots of metrics to find that. One of them is called like a citation ranking, which means how much have your publications that you have authored been cited by other people. That is a way to know how powerful your publications has been. So again, we previously talked about impact factor, which is like the status of the journal and how high quality they are, how rigorous they are in their acceptance, and you know how much practice-changing research they publish. And now we're talking about the individual who is publishing. So for journals, they get known by impact factors. So like Nature and Science might have 30, 40, 50 kind of level of impact factors, whereas like I know MDPI cells or like plus one might have slightly lower journal impact factors. But having said that, when we talk about citation rankings, we're talking about the individual who's getting published. Suppose I have published a paper and it ended up being cited by like thousands of people. So my citation rankings going up. Whereas I published something in a good journal, but then it's not something that the rest of the world builds on. It becomes irrelevant at some point. So then my citation rankings are lower because people, when they're writing their new papers and their new journals, they are not, again, repeatedly citing my work and building on my work. So that's another one of the metrics. There's a lot more ways of figuring this out, but we will be finishing this overview video here today. And stay tuned if you want to see a much more in-depth way of understanding, reading, dissecting a typical journal article in clinical research, how to understand it, how to present it, and how to write it. Those are going to be focused in our next video. Hope you guys have a wonderful week. Hey guys, before you go, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one career counseling services in clinical research. So if you do feel that beyond the videos and the emails where I answer all of your questions, you need a little bit more of hands-on support, you're not getting those interviews and you're not really sure why, or you just don't know how to handle certain questions because of your, you don't have all the experiences, but you know that you can do the job. If you need some additional help in resume building, cover letter design, interview prep, or just general career consultations, I do offer this service now live. Find out more by clicking the link below. I have a whole video where I explain what services I offer, and there's a form there if you would like to sign up. Until next time, this was The Brown Feminist. Bye!